All right, thank you. Yeah, maybe I stand up at some point, but let's see. Okay, so just to start, a general introduction. I think this is this already some older headlines, but social media is in headlines, of course, all the time, particularly if it also is about youth and mostly negative, right? And there's popular science books that are related to science, and they make all kinds of statements, and some of these also have led to some rather extreme forms of policy, like in Australia, where there's like a social media ban will go in effect in a year or so. Yeah, let's see how that goes. But I was thinking, and this was the only headline I found like last year. That's interesting. That basically said, well, actually, we don't really know. So, what really the impact of social media is on teens? And I think that was well the most fair article that I found. And one of the things that I also want to focus my research on a little bit more before I focus mostly on peer interactions in schools, etc., also on teens. And been looking into this, and myself and also other people also have identified like a few points, and I list only a few here, why actually it's not that clear. Because if you look also at the research, research on social media and youth has been around for quite a while. So there's definitely more than a decade of work on this. But there are a few limitations in that work that maybe also sort of hampered having strong conclusions. And one of them is this over reliance on subjective and high-level self-report measures like screen time, particularly screen time. So basically, these are self-reported screen times, like how long have you been on a screen or a phone? And these, well, one problem is that they turn out not to be really reliable for actual screen time. And I think more importantly, they don't really tell you what's happening on screen. Right? So we don't really know what's happening on the screens. Then it's really hard to predict what the impact is. And related to that is the sort of what we could say the underuse of social media trace data. So those are the data from the apps itself or the websites. They basically store a lot of data also on the phone or in different ways. This is actually accessible data, so you can get a really good measure of what's going on the screen, but it hasn't been used a lot in psychological research, also other types of research. And there have been experimental studies, but those were never sort of validated. So there were some social media mock-up kind of tasks, but often not related to what's happening in the real world. Then also a lot of work has been done, and there's not really what I call like a developmental framework, because I think it's very important also to think about, if we think about teens, so for me at least, also as a developmental psychologist, it's important to really embed also the studies in what we know about development and, for instance, adolescent brain development. And then, putting these things together, I think we can make some interesting next steps. And I'm just going to give some examples of what we did, and that's sort of a brief overview of what we'll be working on in the next 5 years or so on a bigger ERC project. But to take a step back, I'm sort of real brief, but so I just some relevant points about adolescence, so the teenage years, because what we know about those, and pick on relevant things for, I guess, social media related social learning aspect. So adolescence starts with puberty, right? So that's a very clear starting point actually, because then, this graph, all of a sudden you have this enormous increase in this pubertal hormones. So that's and those going to affect the body, how it's organized, but also they actually cross this blood-brain barrier. So they go into the brain and they interact with all kinds of brain systems. We still have a lot to learn, but we know these are changing also social and affective processes during the time. So there's very turbulent times which end in adulthood, which is not so clearly defined, right? So that's more like a social construct than the beginning of puberty, which is really clearly a biological state. Next to sort of the hormonal changes, you already saw the sort of animation which showed sort of, brain structure, particularly how thick the cortex is. And also if you look at regions, here some regions, the names are not that relevant, but those are all related to social cognitive processes. And if we look at the structural changes here again, so here's between 8 and 23, so it's broadly adolescence, we see also there are still large changes happening in brain structure. And these indicate initial also there's still a lot of plasticity, so openness to experience in the social world also, and yeah, changes in cognitive processes. Really, again, this really high level. Then other things, of course, that happen in adolescence is that it's also a period of social transitions, right? So it sort of goes together with going to high school or middle school, depending on where you live. And you see the shift away from parents to peers, right? Peers become more important. You're going to spend more time with them, and their influence also is getting bigger and bigger. And that from the parents is getting smaller and smaller. It's not irrelevant at all. So sometimes people think they don't matter anymore if they're parents of teenagers, but they actually do. But teenagers also are good at pretending they're not. Right. So, and then the other thing, so this whole like transition into this peer network, and this is also work I've done before, is really looking at the social networks in schools. For instance, the classroom is really like a key sort of social network for most of adolescents. We spend a lot of time, and it's very important there also to find your place. Right? You also have sports, you have other social networks that's always broader, like the whole school, but often this is a very core to the sort of peer network that you're spending a lot of time in. And there you have to sort of fit in, right? You want to belong to the group, but you also want to stand out. You want to also be, you have to develop your own identity. You want to be, you find your own sort of unique thing within that network as well. Another thing, of course, this is the first time and also very important motive for lots of behaviors. You see that there's romantic relationships, right? So like if you think elementary school, that just really doesn't happen. It's not the same. So all these things are happening, and of course now, like already for quite a while, this sort of we have this extra layer, right? So now there's this, you don't have only that network and maybe your soccer team or whatever, but you have this whole social media network that, again, if you look at what young people do, particularly in the beginning, they spend most of the time interacting with the same kids from school, but of course the network is broadening and there's way more input. And again, and just to bring a little bit focus of things that I'm going to talk about also today, if we think about the adolescents and how they interact and why they interact and what motivates them in many ways, right? Again, I just pick up on two, is this need to belong. So the one thing I've explained before. So really the affiliation, you want to be part of the group, and that motivates lots of the behaviors. There's a very strong motivator for many, many things, but it's also this need for cognition, right? So they also spend a lot of time just, talking, and maybe it's gossip, but it's also finding out stuff about the world through their peers. Even if they can ask parents that might have better information, they prefer for many things to ask their peers. And the same, right, now, so, I guess many of these things we also see in this online world, right? So it can bring a sense of belonging. You can find friends or bigger groups that you really feel part of, but you can also learn a lot about the world. And to bring it back to sort of more my type of research also is then looking at these motivations and then bring it back to sort of cognitive process that I'm interested in studying in this age group and that context. Then is that like social feedback processing, for instance, the like, but it could be other types of feedback, and social information processing, which would be more like how does my belief or attitudes about the world change when I'm presented with information online or in my peer group. So that's the bigger thing. And this is just summarizing, right? So what we sort of see if you look at all those changes, biological and in the social world, this is a seen this teenage years as a sensitive period for social and affective processing, and that now sort of occurs, right? So I call it like the age of social media onset, right? So around the beginning of adolescence, when all these things are happening, you also sort of pushed into this social media world. And and again, I'm going to just focus on these two sort of processes and how these, all these things sort of interact. So that's the sentence you had, like, the brain and all the stuff. Yeah. I'm mostly focusing here on typical development, particularly in this. And I think so the way I want to do it now, before I really studied social networks and sort of in real life, how people interact and how they sort of influence each other. And I'm going to maybe give an example of that too, if time permits, but now focusing really on these affordances of social media, right? So here, this is sort of, yeah, mostly Instagram-like, right? So you have all these different elements and pieces of information that make some things very explicit. And I want to use those also to study these things, right? So if you look at the likes, that's very, very clear, like feedback. In a way, comments are also very interesting, but they can be all over the place. Yeah, and I mean, there's different types of information, but of course, there's information in the post itself or in comments, etc. And I'll get back to that. But these, I think, are really interesting affordances of social media that are not only on Instagram, but basically any social media platform has some sort of feedback and there's some sort of information, right? So even if there are many differences between the type of platforms. All right, yeah, so more of an overview of what I want to talk about. So let's see how far we get today. So it's like half an hour, right? And
Ish, but
ish.
also
Yeah.
up to you.
Yeah, okay. Well, so first I would just want to talk about one of the more recent studies about feedback processing that we did, and that also shows sort of another thing that you could find is a sort of computational approach that we take to this. So it's a very full slide, but what we wanted to do is use a computational model here, like a reinforcement learning model that explains engagement on Instagram. So what it uses is the likes you get on a post, and then it has the behavior of the model, particularly that it's trying to predict is how fast you're going to post the next post. Right. So if you're really engaged and really like you're going to be just posting really fast, and maybe if you're not so engaged, you post not so fast. And the idea is that, and this is from an old, sort of foraging kind of a reinforcement learning model, is that if there's lots of rewards in the environment, so you're just going to be engaging a lot, and you're going to forage lots of likes and get lots of likes. But if they run out, you also stop investing in that environment, and you're going to be calmer, right? So, um, yeah, you don't really see that from the equations, but here's like a simulation where you see this red line. This is just a simulation where you see an increase in likes and then a decrease and then increase and decrease. And the black line is how fast you post. So it's the time between posts. So if it's very small, that time between posts, here it's very low number, you're posting a lot. And then if the likes drop at some point, you also just, the time between posts gets really large because nothing's happening. Now, how quickly and how fast you respond to changes in likes, that's the thing that we're interested in. There's one parameter in the model, which is called alpha, which is typical for learning rates, not really, but that's really like how sensitive are you to likes, particularly a change in likes. So all of a sudden you get more likes than you expected. Some people then get really motivated, like, yay, and then start posting a lot, right? And other people, maybe not in it for the likes at all, so they would just not respond. And the nice thing is we can actually use this model to look at individuals' real Instagram behavior. Skip this. So I found basically actually a data set. So I was searching for this from computer scientists who scraped a ton of data because they wanted to have an age prediction algorithm. And then I asked, can I have this data? Because they had teenagers, a group of teenagers, so about 8,000 and 9,000 adults, so lots of them, and over 1.6 million posts. So that's nice because we try to predict, right, when people post only by the likes. And of course, we know there's many other things that affect when people post. So, the model's only trying to catch on a little bit of variance that is predicted by the likes. Well, here just some stats about some, of course, most posts have a few likes and then some have a lot. This is all very standard. But yeah, a ton of data, and then we fit the model to all of those. And then for each individual, we get this learning rate. And our prediction was the teens would be more sensitive, so they would have a higher learning. That's basically what we found. So the scale is very, yeah, it seems very small, but for this type of model, it isn't. But it means indeed that, you know, when there's more likes in on Instagram, they start posting more and more and faster, and they're more affected by this than adults. But also the other way around, right? So they also, if the likes drop, they are also quicker to stop using Instagram. So in that sense, they're not like more sensitive to likes, but not more addicted. Because addiction type of behavior is basically you just keep doing what you're doing, even if you basically start losing or not getting anything. Right? You just basically are actually less sensitive to change in likes often. So we thought that was interesting, and then want to follow up on that a little bit more, just adding some more, you know, equations to it. But there's an interesting theory about mood, like your current mood being a reflection of basically momentum of learning or momentum in reinforcement learning, saying that the moment you get more and more likes, for instance, or, you know, rewards because you're doing something good, your mood is actually tracking that momentum. Like, okay, now I'm on a good track. Everything is going better than expected. Or it's the same, that your mood is stable. It's just the world is as expected, or it's worse. And so we can, if again, it's the same simulation here with the rewards going up and down. And then, they're here below, sort of the purple lines, basically tracking that, right? So we can see it's going up if the world is getting into a better state, and it's going down when it's in a worse state. We could make predictions from this model based on the behavior that we had before. Oh, just going ahead. That also, because adolescents were more sensitive to the likes, they would actually also show greater mood variability. They would also be more moody, basically, based on what happened. And I thought that was an interesting sort of prediction by the model. But for this, we of course needed to measure mood, and we also needed to be able to manipulate the like. So we first now test this experimentally, where we have this sort of Instagram simulated task, very simple, where we have the participants be able to post stuff and they get likes. And before the experiment started, and we also told them this, we had all these memes that we selected, they were already pre-liked, basically liked by other people. So what we also could do, we always gave them 4, and out of the 4, they could pick one, and then they would get basically the rewards. And they could see how many likes they get. And what we could do, of course, give them what we call high reward sets or low reward sets. So we can just give them really good memes or really bad ones. So no matter what they choose, they just get like very few likes. And then we can basically, here's an example actually of a model simulation, but also the black dots here are the likes. So first we give them a set of high value memes and then basically low value. And we can switch it around, and we can basically play around with this level of likes to see how people respond to it. And here again, there's the model predictions that the purple line are the teenagers and the brownish one are the adults. And you particularly see that if the likes drop, we found the prediction would be that adolescents would be more sad about this, basically, or their mood would also drop. So I put them in that same experiment, and then actually, the model predictions panned out. And we also see that adolescents indeed then are more affected in terms of mood, particularly when there's an absence or a sudden absence or sudden change in a drop in the likes. I can also do questions in the meantime. I don't know what's usual.
Usually we do them at the end.
Yeah, okay, do them at the end. Finally, this is also from the same paper. We had some students who participated actually in another study, not related to this, but we also measured their brain structure because that's basically part of any fMRI study that we run. But then we asked them, can we basically scrape your whole Instagram account for research? We're only going to look at the likes and the timestamps of your post. So we're not going to read, we're not going to look at pictures, only this. And then, many said yes, not everybody, but most people said yes. And then we did that. And the interesting thing is, so the green dots are the ages of the participants when they were in the scanner. So they were between 19 and 23. But then you can see the purple dots when they first posted on Instagram. So you immediately for free get pretty nice longitudinal data because some already were on it when they're 11, really early adopters. Because this study is, I think, in 2018. So they were already really like one of the first users. But then we have a lot of data on each of these subjects, and again, we can fit that model and see how sensitive they are in general to the likes, and correlate that with all these different brain regions. And what we mainly found, so this for the non-neuroscientists, so this is the brain like cut like this in the middle, and you're looking at really subcortical, so like in sort of inside of the brain, regions that are all involved in reward type of processing. So ventral striatum, amygdala, and particularly the amygdala point stood out because this one was also correlated with individual differences in social anxiety, just on the questionnaire, and self-reported problematic social media use. So we thought that's interesting that all these things sort of converge, right? So we can see it's really about the social feedback and the social context that seems, correlated at least at this point, that they are really sensitive to. When you're really sensitive to that, that you really care a lot about what other people think about you, but also this can really lead to problematic use. But of course, here it's just all correlations, but things we want to follow up on to see if there's some interesting causal relationships between these things. So how am I doing time-wise?
23 plus 3.
Okay. Then, quickly example of paradigm. Also, this just starting this off right now, so it's also nice to get some feedback and questions. Looking at more information processing, right? So this is also the collaborators in Bonn who did basically all of the actual work. So we're looking at news consumption and well, we know that teens, don't really, so I call it online and involuntary, right? So they don't read newspapers and they get news on their feeds, but it's not because they chose it, but it just appears and then they see it. And it also, and this is not just for teens, but you can also see that their behaviors, they see the headline and they go to the comments. They don't actually read news. And we thought that sort of interesting and also picked up on that in terms of an experiment because we're interested in how people actually respond to then these comments, like what they see and if they support or not support, for instance, what's in the headline. Because we feel like, particularly for teenagers, that's really determining how they see whatever, consume this news and changes their attitudes. So these are also all stimuli we got from Facebook at the time. So this is just an example of what they would see. So in this experiment, they would see some general posts with a headline. Those were a lot of them were pre-tested, and they would see if they would indicate if they would agree with that headline or not. So this is not the best example because here it says, the impact of pandemics like COVID are exacerbated by climate change. Well, you can see like maybe you agree, maybe you don't agree, maybe you just don't know. Then you stay in the middle. Then we also had, like how confident were they about like whether they agreed or not. So we could fine tune interesting statements that they were just, if they were both in the middle, then they just had no clue. It's still then interesting to see how they would afterwards change their opinion. But these were sort of to set baseline opinions, and later on, in a later phase, initially a week later, they would have similar or the same statements, and then we used comments that we also scraped from Facebook that clearly, and these were all again pre-tested by other people, agreed or disagreed with that headline. And they always had like 4, just to keep the experiment short. And after reading those statements, we can again ask their attitudes towards that headline. And then this is a little bit more nicer overview. We also had 3 conditions here, right? So we could select the opinions that everybody agreed with the headline, everybody disagreed, or mixed. So 2 agreed, 2 disagree, and to see if we can sort of move them around in different directions. Well, we did this is all young adults, so this is actually all sort of student population, so we between 18 and 25. And this is really just for me interesting, but basic results, right? We could show that indeed they would move in the direction of the comments. Their attitude would shift. And we replicate that in another sample. So it's US sample, then in German sample, and this is things that we want to do also in youth, but then also manipulate all kinds of other things. But we can talk about that later. I'm just going to skip this. Here is another thing we did also with mouth handsomes. I don't have I think the reference is not here, but this is published study where in COVID times we also looked at popular Dutch vloggers for youth and how they behaved during the time, and also the comments underneath the YouTube videos. And those were all rated as, again, as being supportive or unsupportive of the YouTube vlogger, or just about something else, which is also a lot, of course. And we looked at compliance and non-compliance within for the COVID regulations that were valid at the time, and then see if they complied, not complied, how that was reflected, for instance, in the comments. And there was quite some non-compliance, actually. And we found that if we looked at the support, just if we look at the whole bunch of comments that were there, actually the non-compliance received more support than compliance in general for these vloggers. And there was a correlation between, if there were actual dismissive statements made by the vloggers. And you also saw that back basically in the comments. Right. So again, this is correlation. Right. So we don't know, like maybe they watch these vloggers because they already know that they also don't agree, or they are influenced by it. But again, this is sort of interesting thing we also want to follow up on. So here we looked at historical data. We did some sort of experimental version of this, which is also interesting. And I think we want to follow up. But of course, COVID times were also difficult because rules were changing all the time. Right. So then the compliance you really had to put it all in context. So it might be a bit difficult to follow sometimes what was actually compliance and non-compliance. But here we had different, like a two-by-two design. We had vloggers who complied, those who did not comply. We just showed those clips. And then again, we put some of the comments that supported it or not supported. And then after we asked these adolescents, after seeing these different combinations of clips, how they thought about COVID and COVID rules. And now we could see that there was really a difference between the groups. So now we had control over what they saw. So we found that if they saw the compliant ones, where there were also supportive statements, they started worrying more about COVID. So that was not really our intention, but that happened. Maybe not bad at the time, but we did find some evidence that also non-compliance decreased the importance, the adolescents' importance of the regulations and rule settings. So this is more like a causal effect, but really only for those who are really identified strongly with the vlogger, because we just picked the top 10 at the time most viewed youth vloggers, but of course our participants, some of them really liked them, or they didn't like them, or identified with them or not. And if they didn't, then basically it had no effect. But that makes a lot of sense. This is half an hour. Yeah, that's fine. I have like many more things to say, but we can just do the Q&A, and then maybe I pick up on those things. So, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
All right.
Yeah, I can also go ahead, sure. We'll open for questions. Yeah,
Yeah.
Start.
Well, the first question maybe, I think looking at the literature and the claims, especially when it comes to adolescent social media use and the effects of mental health, people often claim that girls and boys use social media in very different ways, and it also has more detrimental effects on the mental health of young women. Do you look at gender effects in research?
We will, right? So it also in the bigger data set, we did not have that identifying information. And also, we only had to operate on age. But clearly, right? So I made that point and then ignored it, that we have to look at the content. And then I only looked at the likes. But of course, it's very important, that ignores a lot, as I said, like there's a lot of variance explained, also probably mood, etc., by other aspects. So this is, yeah, for me, sort of what I showed here is really sort of bare bones structure that we're now going to build on all kinds of additional things. And gender is definitely one of them. So we have first not focused on gender so much, but already in the mood data, we find some evidence there's gender effects also, only on likes, right? So, and then you can see that there will be compounding effects if it's, the type of things you look at. Yeah. Yeah, sure.
All right, we go to Dan, Matthijs, you had one, right? Or,
Did I raise my hand?
oh, sorry. Okay, Dan, Giovanni, Matthijs, yeah.
Thank you, very impressive. I have two questions. One maybe the clarification. So when you had the comment about this prediction part, so does it mean that if they get negative feedback, then they stop posting, but they don't stop using social media, right? So it's more like they are leveling down in the hierarchy of what ladder, so it's more like switching to another dealer or switching to another dealer because they didn't get the flash from that.
Perhaps, right? So let's say we don't know that from our data, and that's an interesting question, right? So like, what do you do? Do you actually, do you go to another platform and start posting there and see if you can get more rewards there? Do you stop using the app? We have some data on this, but not enough. Like, do they actually stop at all, or do they? And we have some evidence in this experimental paradigm. I didn't show that, but they could post stuff, but there was also a feed they could just scroll in. And what there looks like, they start just, scrolling in the feed more. And then, then it could be, they stop harvesting maybe, but then they do other behavior. So maybe, because there's, of course, in this architecture, like you can also get rewards, likes are rewards, but funny videos maybe also, right? So then maybe you just like, oh, maybe you can find something else rewarding. That could be true. Yeah. So, but it is just only in this little framework that I would say that the sensitivity is not looking like addiction. But the alternatives we don't know.
And my other question is that you said that this learning rate is correlated with moodiness and anxiety. Do you expect to be correlated with personality traits, like neuroticism, for example, or status-related personality trait? And do you think that does it activate personality traits, or does it influence adolescent brain in developing different personalities?
Well, the final question I think is very interesting, and that's the big question, right? So to see how like a different type of engagement with the platform over that long time of brain development, where there's all this plasticity, will actually show like divergent sort of paths in developing the brain. And I think it might. And I think given we only have that indeed a correlation with social anxiety, individual different measures. But again, that we have that measure only at the endpoint now. So endpoint, but we only have that at the point that they went to the scanner were 18. So we don't know again whether that's an effect of all those years having, being really responsive to all the likes and interacting with the platform in that way, and now being high at social anxiety, or whether that was already the start. So we don't know, right? So, but these, I think, I think there's like a interaction between these things, and now we're trying to set up study from the beginning to see if we can find out. Yeah, I can tell you 5 years. Yeah.
Yeah, a very interesting presentation, by the way. And I wanted to go back to one of the findings that you had that adolescent or the younger sample was more sensitive to likes. And I was wondering if you kind of wanted to develop some kind of possible explanations and come from more the social psychology side. I would say that my own suggestion would be that adolescents have been socialized with social media early on, and so their reference network is completely different than adults. So their own value comes from those reference networks that are also online, whereas my parents would not really care if they get a few likes, because also that doesn't count in their outside reference network. So their value that, yeah. I was wondering if you had any thoughts or any alternative explanations for that.
Yeah, I think this is also happening, right? So I think that we have sort of cohort effects and we have age effects. So in the sense that they grew up with this, and a bigger chunk of their social life is already online and happening online. So therefore it's more important. But I think also from developmental studies, we also know that in general, their motivation and their sensitivity to feedback from their peers, also in their classroom, their direct peers, right, without this whole context, is also more impactful.
Yeah.
Right? So it's also, I think, so it's an interaction between these things, and that makes it really hard to separate them. So one thing, that I pointed out in the beginning, I think is related to this, sense of belonging and the need to belong, and that need might be really strong in that, initially. But there might be individual differences, and there might also be temporal differences, even during the day. So we see that there's some interesting studies where they have some social deprivation studies, right? So you're sort of disconnected from your group for a long time, then your need to connect and need to belong is very high. So yeah, I don't have those slides, but I actually built that into the model, right? So that the drive to get the likes and to get the positive feedback is also driven by dynamic changes need to belong. So if you really think about foraging models also, right? So the animals are also foraging, but if they're no longer hungry, they stop also, even if there's a lot of food. So you can also start thinking about that in that way for adolescents. So then they're just more hungry, right? But still, if that hunger is sort of fine is gone and they had enough like, they will also stop. And if we can experimentally manipulate the hunger, we can basically test the effect of that, right? Also between different ages, but also see like that's really the part that is also driving the behavior. And then still, right? So we also need more to get more into the generational differences if we do these developmental things. But as for the previous question, and what is very clear that we need longitudinal data analysis to really answer this age question, and not compare different cohorts. Yeah.
Oh, we can put that.
Thanks. First of all, I have a 9-year-old daughter, so I now realize that I should very much enjoy the time with her before she hits puberty, and she will.
Social media on set.
My question is basically exactly the same as the previous question, so I will. I think that maybe it's a little bit different, but also I might want to reframe it into a suggestion or an idea, and hear what you think about it. So I was wondering, I think the same thing. So for the difference could be also due to the fact that adults are just used to social media to a large extent already, whereas the younger people are not, and it's new to them. So would it be possible to do a study with adults that have only recently opened a social media account, for instance, and maybe with, I mean, that it will not be easy to find them, the older people, or if you have very new social media networks that behave in a different way or something. But could it be that I mean, it's related, right? So that part of the differences you find are due to the fact that it's just that the fact that it's new to younger people, and it's already and older people are so much used to likes and that, well,
that could also be true. Like, so in the other data set I showed you, we had quite some variance on the age that people started with social media, and that's still true. That there is a lot of variance, because some kids start at 8 and are really young, but it happens. So I think particularly in that age group, it's easier to study, because then I can actually find a nice slice of 10-year-olds where some of them have already been online, for 2 years, some are not, and some just got a phone on their, on their 10th birthday. So that's also one of the things I want to do now, just to focus on those and then see, like, but yeah, again, we have to follow for a long time if you want to see what the effect is of 10 years of this. And then you get these other interactions that it might affect your brain development. So
Yeah.
again, the answer is longitudinal studies. So but that is really interesting. And I think it's hard to, like, for adults who have not yet, I'm actually sort of one of them, but have a social media account, they're just weird, right? So I don't know, like, if you put them now, there's other things that they're different in than other most people. So also a hard group to study, maybe.
Maybe, I mean, like TikTok is still relatively new for most adults in the Netherlands, right? So maybe it would be interesting to examine what, I mean, then they will have had experience with, I don't know, Hives, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, I don't know.
Yeah.
But,
But we always do ask, like, when even for the students, like, if they sort of can remember, but then the data donation or scraping is nice because we can actually pinpoint the first post, like, how long have you been online, and see how much that explains invariance. And sometimes, and that's why we also move back to experimental designs, we just build our own, not so fancy, but social media platform, right? So then everybody's also on the same page in a way. But it's hard.
Yeah, I've put myself into the queue mentally, so trying to select which one. But I think since we're already talking about TikTok, I think will you look at TikTok because it's interesting. It's interestingly different in a few ways, I think. So usually TikTok is less personal, right? Instagram serves both the function of being exposed to new content and being in your little bubble, whereas on TikTok you would trust the mysterious algorithm much more, which then probably means you rely more on comments, maybe because you need something to ground this new content that you're looking at, to like a help to evaluate it. And also Instagram is often text-based. They're moving more towards Reels, but if we're looking at a classic grid post, you cannot read the post and the comments at the same time. Whereas with TikTok, it's a video, so the audio often suffices as well. So you are able to glance over the comments and at the same time watch the video. So I personally feel like comments are much more relevant on TikTok, also because it's harder to manipulate the speed of the video. You can, but you know what I mean? I can control my reading speed more than I can control the speed of the video. So maybe I get bored more easily moving towards the comments. So all of this would speak towards comments being super relevant, but somewhat different than on Instagram, right? Will you do the same on TikTok?
You will definitely do the same. Like TikTok, of course, also for teens now, that's basically the main platform. So for that, we have to move to TikTok. And indeed, you see this back and forth, because on Facebook, also the comments are already, very clear, and that's also where this whole initial studies came from news and comments and etc. And also on YouTube, there, right, it's the same. You can just keep scrolling while the video is playing, sort of. And then on Instagram, it's different, but it's more personal. So there's, right. So we want to target these different things on different platforms, and then sometimes take it to the lab and then just extract one thing. No, I think also, and again, indeed, how you exactly interact and what's salient, which of these affordances is more salient on the platform is different. We also, in terms of the social feedback, Instagram is interesting because then then we really care about the comments you get, and of course you will read all of them, or like in a different way, right? Because it's your post, you don't care about the post, you already know, but you just want to know what people said, and you can go through all the. But even I see teenagers being interested in also a lot in the comments, also on Instagram. They just want to read everything.
Yeah, comments of memes or first.
Like influencers who just post something. They just want to know, what do people think about this. They're really, really interested in what other people think.
And do you think there's a difference between the so-called silent majority that only reads and never posts comments, and people who actually also post comments?
Yes, I do think so. And that's also another interesting question. And I think for that, it's really nice that we now do find different ways of either scraping again, or data donation, or with DSA get data, who knows. But there are all kinds of different ways to really look at not self-report active versus passive, but really like, okay, how often do you post relative to how many times spent online, and what can we do NLP almost both, positive, negative. Yeah, sort of zoom in and all those things.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, then we'll move to Jakob and then online question, then Gijs.
Yeah, I also have a question again about like the like more broader framework. I think it's super interesting like to look at the social media effects. I was wondering a little bit when there's just anecdotally, but when you ask people or also young people how they experience social media, I think their use might not only be like justified with how amazing it makes them feel, but more like how costly it would be to not use social media. So what costs would occur? Like, and so I feel like focusing on the effects of social media is like part of the picture, but also do you also think about looking at what costs it could be like to not use social media, or how does that relate to those social media effects?
Yeah. So this is sort of the fear of missing out kind of motivation is also for teenagers really strongly tied to the sense of belonging, right? So because basically you have to, and that's sort of this collective trap also for for now that people see on like primary schools that they want to, with the parents sort of basically saying let's all not give our kids phones, and they're happy and the kids agree. But once you're the only one without a phone, you're missing out and you cannot connect. So you need to have seen the same content to be able to talk about it. So there's definitely that is a cost. But yeah, so I see that as related to this and sort of sense of belonging. So I think also again, like I said before, so this is something I looked at in other research before, where people are in their social network, right? So if they're really central, if they're really, so we mapped all the social networks in classrooms, they're not so sensitive to these things because, well, you're popular anyway, so maybe you missed this one new trend, you'll catch up. But if you're on the outside of the network, right, your needs are your motive, you have to know, then it's more valuable. So yeah, so in a way we want to take these things into account too, right? So I think you have to, yeah, it happens in that context. It is a layer still on top of the real world, although they spend maybe even sometimes more time almost online. It's still about their real friends. Indeed, that's still the sort of the basis. Yeah.
It's interesting, maybe to also, sorry that I try to include younger children, because my daughter, she's in a class where, I don't know, 2 people have a phone.
Yeah.
And she never complains about that.
No,
never.
me too. Yeah.
Because it's just.
Yeah.
And yeah, that indicates that the reason is
Yeah.
that it's that this plays a very important role. So that would be really interesting. Look at, I mean different schools where maybe in some classes they are forbidden, others not. So that
So I had the like some my daughter who's now first year high school, but in the final year primary school, well, she basically came home and said like I'm the girl without a phone, and that feels very it feels really bad. Like yeah, okay, but all the other parents are stupid, but then still like she's the kid without a phone. Yeah, and that's you can feel like that's also not really not good for her not to be that person, right? So at that point you're really sort of in that trap. Yeah, and it really depends on the context and maybe on the majority. Yeah, but there was another.
Yeah, absolutely. Works. There's a question online from Gustavo. Thanks for the really interesting presentation. It seems like social media behavior may be at the crossroads between 2 things. First, gamification of social behavior, as if it's a social currency. And second, social and self-regulation. So even the brain structures you showed to be diverge across social media behavior weren't obviously related to social processing and more to do with motivation and reward. Is it possible that social media is different from other forms of socialization because it makes feedback much more obvious, abstract, and controlled, almost like a financial transaction? And in that case, could that lead teenagers to approach socializing as a less holistic process as they grow up?
Very nice question, and almost answered the question itself. Because, well, I think yes, right? So I think it does change social interactions in a fundamental way because it's putting a lot of attention on some parts, and then other parts are much more into the background. So I do believe, yeah, sort of a gamification. If the likes are very clear in that sense, right? So in that interaction and very quantified, also very comparable, right? And that makes also the anxiety much larger and sort of like if you just hang out with friends and, maybe we're just talking and I give you a compliment and I say something nice to you, but we're not really like keeping score, like, oh, but you gave me 3 compliments and 2, and then, but of course on social media, that's all very, very clear. So I think that actually does affect how they interact and they focus on this also. And it might not be that meaningful also in the end. There's also lots of ambiguity because you don't know if people saw your post. There's this weird lag, right? So I post something, maybe you saw it now, maybe you didn't, maybe you post later, or even if I sent you a text, I don't know, like there's this asynchrony that that increases the ambiguity and then clarity in our communication that does exist in face-to-face interaction. So yeah, so it's very, I think those things do have all kinds of downstream effects that are hard to follow. And then the other thing about more the self-regulation part, I think it was about, yeah, I totally agree. So I also think that one of the conclusions we had from that study is also that's also something that that's still developing, but also kids really need to learn to sort of be resilient in these types of environments, because it's a lot about sort of regulating also the emotions and there's the things that happen when you not get these types of feedback.
Yeah. A quick follow-up, does social standing on social media still translate to social standing in real life? I mean, 10 years ago when I was a teenager, it did, but is that still the case?
That's a good question. I don't know. Like I don't know. I think I think it will still be highly correlated. Also because you go online and you have a lot of friends, then immediately you have a lot of followers. So that it is in many ways a mirror, right? A black mirror, but like of real life. So the kids get bullied online, they get bullied in real life. The kids are popular, and so in many cases, yes. But you do see exceptions, and these can be really positive. So you can maybe be bullied at school, but when really popular, but in a very different other network than your school, not in your school network or chat group, but maybe you find something else totally outside of that network, and there you can actually be really popular, right? So can be nice.
We have another question by Gijs.
Yeah, I've got multiple, but no, let me start with one. I was regarding the reinforcement learning model. I was thinking what would happen to this model and the subsequent findings if you allow not only for likes but also dislikes. So negative comments, which of course is very common in the political domain of social.
Yeah, sure. So we're working on this. So the first thing we did was simple and actually we all had a number of comments in the first data set, not the comments itself. And then, so we didn't know if they're positive, negative. Instagram, I think maybe mostly positive, I don't know. But if we enter that into model, as if those were additional rewards, that predicted the behavior even better. But we don't know if there were also probably negative rewards. So we definitely want to do that. In the experiments that I showed you, the more experimental paradigm, we did actually have dislikes. And what we can see, as we also see in general reinforcement learning paradigms, with just rewards and punishment, that often, particularly the younger participants, are more sensitive to the dislikes and the negative outcomes. So this is also something that we really want to follow up on. You can also split the learning rates, have one for positive outcomes and negative outcomes. We often find these models also predict behavior better. And then we find, that the learning rate for negative is actually stronger. So people show stronger responses to negative outcomes.
And then they post less or more?
Well, then they would post less, right?
Yeah.
So, but we'll have to see, again, like we strip a lot here, right? So maybe you post less, but maybe you comment, you feel more strongly urged to comment back on a negative comment, right? So that's not even an option in this, how the model now specified and the data that we put in, because we feel, we're now playing around. We actually build a whole database of comments. We have people comment and stuff, and now people comment and comments, and have those sentiment analysis on those things also, and see how strong those are all rated, so that we can ask these type of questions. Like if someone wrote a nasty comment on your post, of course you're maybe less likely to post again, but more likely to respond on that comment than if it's a positive comment. Then you're just like, yay, just gonna post more. And if it's negative, you're just like, oh yeah, you know. And we find that if people are in a bad mood because they don't get the likes, and this is another thing we're gonna follow up on, they're more likely to post negative comments. Right? So you get these self-reinforcing network effects. Yeah.
I'm still somewhat interested in the role of comments, especially when consuming news and non-social network content. So did you ever look at the difference between the influence that these comments have on belief, like factual belief, and evaluation in general mood? Because I could imagine that trust in an individual comment may be low, but it still affects your attitude towards the overall post. Right?
No, this is really something we want to do. This is exactly one of the things we want to do now. Like, it's not about you agree or disagree, but really believe or not believe. And one of the data sets we're interested, for instance, for youth, I think is really interesting is the mental health domain, because there's so many, mental health tips or self-analysis type of things. Like, oh, if you have these 5 things, then and then those have streams of comments. And yeah, I think for youth it's very hard to assess whether they should believe that, or whether that's even true that these 5 things indicate that you're like a narcissist or autistic or whatever. And I think the comments there also play a big role in this. So yeah, we basically want to get some of these videos and scrape all comments, and then see again, do the similar thing, but then really like, do you think this is true kind of question. Yeah, I think it's super interesting.
I also think it would be super interesting, maybe somewhat frustrating with news and low news trust specifically.
Yeah.
So someone's a journalist and spends a lot of time researching and preparing as objective as possible post, and then one person comments, gets 1,000 likes, and has the same or possibly a higher belief than the original post.
Sure, yeah. So I guess that sort of that picture with all this, So we also think about really like all those little elements, right? So we have a post, and then a post where someone comments, and then that person has so many followers, more than the original poster, for instance. So like to what extent, and then that post, the comment is liked a lot. The type of social validation, So if you think about the amount of different possibilities in experimental design, there's infinite. But we definitely think also, for instance, teenagers might be more sensitive to how often a comment is liked in judging validity than adults. So that's one of the first things we sort of want to look at. But there's so many things, right? You can but I definitely think that is and that's nice about these sort of platforms. It's all so quantified and clear. That allows us to also study it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh no, I just wanted to, it just reminded me that the German public broadcaster now, they now introduced that on their website. So like NOS, they will enable comments now under their videos and like the news and everything, and they have received a lot of backlash also for like, enabling this comment function now, as if it would be like a social network. But
Germany is always 10 years late. Shutting down.
Yeah, everybody. Hey, we can do comments. No. Yeah.
All right, thanks. Thank you very much for this really interesting presentation. Thanks.
Okay. Well, thanks.